Morning, everybody. Thanks for joining this webcast hosted by Risual and FlowForma to look at eForm and workflow solutions. Just give you a quick overview of Risual before we go into the main content. So, as many of you will already know, Risual are a Tier 1 Microsoft partner, and we deliver and maintain solutions on Microsoft technologies. This includes all of the Azure and Office 365 cloud solutions also. Probably worth also noting that we were finalists for Microsoft Partner of the Year UK in 2012 and 2013, and we did actually win that award last year as well. My name's Alex Egger. I'm the business manager for Risual's Cloud Productivity Group, and as part of that role, I look after three practices within Risual, these being CRM, business productivity, and app dev. Our CRM practice delivers solutions based on Microsoft Dynamics CRM, whether that's sales management, case management, or really any sort of bespoke CRM solution you could require. We have an application development practice who build solutions on Microsoft.net. These solutions could be standalone, they may be mobile apps, or they may link into the various Microsoft products, which we also use to build our solutions. The most relevant really for this webcast would be business productivity, and the business productivity practice deliver solutions based mainly on SharePoint, Yammer, Power BI, and general Office 365. As part of that practice, we have a number of partners we work with, and one of those in terms of workflow and eForm solutions is FlowForma. We've been working with FlowForma for a while now, and we found that their eForm solution and workflow solution, provides a lot of benefits for our customers. So with that in mind, well, we invite them to join us on this webcast, where they could provide you with an overview of their product and also explain, how it could bring benefits to your business. So with that said, I'm going to hand over to Paul Stone now, who will be able to guide you through the product and also ask any questions you may have in respect to that. Over to you, Paul.
So just first of all, some introductions. My name is Paul Stone. I'm a solution architect and I work for FlowForma. And I'm going to be giving a product demonstration today. And the first thing I want to do is briefly run through the agenda. I'm going to keep it as brief as possible. So what we'll have is a Q&A session at the end where you can ask me any questions and any details. So I'm going to cover off the product background, what the product is, and what type of solutions we see FlowForma fitting into, what sort of problems are we trying to solve, what the end user experience is of the product, so how end users view forms and workflows and all that, and then how those workflows are configured and deployed. A little bit on our delivery approach, because our delivery approach here is different. We very much have a prototyping approach to building up solutions. And then I'll just touch on architecture and integration. Now, I'm specifically going to keep this demonstration light on the technical side, but you know what, if you have any technical questions at all, you can ask them here at Q&A at the end. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to talk about is background, and basically FlowForma is a business process enablement tool. And what does that mean? Well, you're probably familiar with business process management tools that handle workflow, where they run through a series of tasks, etc. And you're probably familiar with forms products as well, which handle data capture, the likes of Infopath. And these products are typically two separate products that need to be integrated together. So if you want to get workflow running with forms and data collection, and let's say document generation, which is another thing, you probably have to integrate several products together to get that solution up and running. But our tool incorporates all three elements in one single tool that's designed to be easy to use. It's a no-code tool so that you can actually configure your workflow and your forms and any document generation and so on, all within one tool. It's designed for business consultants, so it's the people who are close to the business problem, who are there talking to the business about their problems and mapping out the workflow on whiteboards and all of that, and they're recording all the information, and the idea is that they can then go in to FlowForma and map out their processes. Now, we also provide a series of process templates that gets you up and running. For example, leave request, capital expenditure request, that kind of thing. And I'm going to show you some of those today, just to give you a flavor of what FlowForma can do. Now, the system is designed to run on top of SharePoint. So it runs on SharePoint on-premise or on SharePoint Online Office 365. And indeed, implementations on-premise can talk to implementations on Office 365. You can exchange information. I'll go through a little bit about that in a minute. We also provide mobile clients so that you can complete your workflows while on the move, enter in data while on the move, and that's automatically synchronized back to your SharePoint environment. And we see ourselves as very progressive in that we're disrupting the existing current BPM market. We're offering something different. We've taken a different angle on the whole thing, and we're moving along with technology all the time. And as a result of that, we feel we won our Best Office 365 ad in ESPC last year. Excuse me, I have a little bit of a cold, so excuse the coughs and sneezes. So straight away we're going to go into a product walkthrough. I'm going to cover off the end user experience first of all, then some configuration and deployment, and then a little bit on mobile accessibility. It's unfortunate that it's hard to demonstrate mobile while you're actually doing a webinar, but I'll talk about what the system can do and how it works. So let me just flip over now to a live demonstration. So if I just tab across here, we'll have to, I'm sorry about this, but I have to jump into another window. So let me just minimize that. So many windows open at the moment. And here we have our first quick look at FlowForma. Now what we're looking at here is a FlowForma site. So FlowForma installs into your SharePoint environment, and it creates a FlowForma site which is used to store all your workflows and all of your data. So basically it uses SharePoint to store all the data associated with the workflow. So any fields that you capture, for example, any sort of documents that you capture, generate are all stored within a SharePoint site. And I'm going to show you now what an end user sees. So sorry, the end user typically will look at this site and they'll see some forms created by me and forms awaiting my input. A form is an instance of a workflow. So a form is, for example, if you had a leave request workflow, each leave request would be a form. And you complete the form in a series of steps, which are like tasks in a workflow. And the best way to understand that is to see it in action. So if I create a new form here, I'm going to create a leave request form. It's a very simple form, but it shows you immediately what the system looks like to the end user. And here we have our form where we have a header area, which I've just left blank. And then down below we see a visual representation of the workflow from an end user perspective. So they see that this workflow has 3 simple steps in it. It's a very basic workflow. And the first step is employee leave request, and that step's highlighted right here. And down below that you see the details that need to be captured in that first step. So for the employee to request some leave, they have to key in this information. And some of the fields you can see are mandatory and so on. And as you enter in information, things called business rules fire in the background that carry out various actions. Now those actions can be something simple like get some information from a SharePoint list, or display some extra fields on the screen. Or it can be something a little bit more complex, like branch the workflow. In other words, show or hide steps in the workflow, take them in and take them out. Or it can be reassigning people to different steps in the workflow and so on. So these business rules are always running along in the background, and they're executed as you progress through the workflow. So here I'm going to select an employee. I'll select myself. And what happens is the system goes away, gets my details from a list, in fact, and pushes this information into some read-only fields that suddenly appear on the screen. So the system is very dynamic, and basically, depending on the information that you enter, the system adjusts to only capture relevant information. So in other words, it's not like a paper form. This is a dynamic electronic form that the screen changes and so on as you enter in information. So it supports a lot of different types of fields. We call fields questions, by the way. So when you hear me talking about questions, I'm talking about fields here. So here we have a lookup question for the employee, and here we have a single line of text question, and down here we have a choice question, and we have a date and time. So a large range of question types are supported, and as you enter in information, certain things happen on the screen. So I've just entered in the number of requested days, and you might have noticed that the net days remaining automatically jumped down to 18. And when this leave request is approved by my manager or by HR, it will be updated onto my leave record in the background. So when I press submit down at the bottom of the screen, that means I've finished entering all the details now. I want to move on to the next step in the workflow. So when I press submit, the system automatically jumps onto the next step. Now, each of these steps are actually assigned to a resource, so that the employee requesting the leave, the next step is the manager approval, and normally, of course, the manager would be a different person. So, under normal circumstances, the form would actually close. So after you enter in the leave details, you press submit and the form will close because it's moved on to another resource, the manager. And the manager would then go in and can action that. So they can look back at the leave request, they can say, oh, I don't like the look of those dates, and they can say no, and they can pass the workflow back to the previous step and have them amend the dates. So the steps are normally only would be accessible to specified resources. In this case, for demo purposes, I've made myself my own manager. So hence, I'm able to approve or reject my own leave. Obviously not a real situation, but there you go. So on this manager approval step, you can see this is much more simple because all I need to do here is say yes or no to the approval. I can pull some information forward just to make it nice and easy, but I can also just click on the previous step to view it. And I can say no, and I can reject it and pass it back and whatever. I can also delegate this to somebody else. So if I'm not, if I don't have the time to review the leave request and approve it, I can delegate it to another user in the system, and just enter in their username, enter in some text here, and an email will be automatically sent to the person I delegate to, and they'll be able to click on a link in the email and jump back in and take my place, basically, and carry out the approval. So they can do the review and do the approval. Now, the system logs all of this, of course, so all of this passing of the workflow from one step to the next and the entering of the data is all logged in SharePoint. Now, that's a quick view of an end-user view. There's lots of different field types, like I said. You can also attach documents. You can also record comments. The system also has an ability to send out emails, so that when you deploy request leave, you can email the manager, and they can click on the link in the email to come back in and do the approval. That's all kind of out of the box. And you can configure those emails. You can change the content. You can change when they're sent and all that kind of thing. So from an end user perspective, they see a very simple view and a very interesting angle on this, because normally, as I said, you have two different products. You have a workflow product, which is a task management system, and then you have a separate forms product. Well, from an end user perspective, it's all in one. So they just see this one simple, easy to use interface. Now, before I go on to show you some more workflows, I'd like to show you how that one was built. So we have a tool called the FlowDesigner, and you might remember I mentioned that the system has been designed for business consultants to configure the workflow. You don't need to be a developer. And here we have the actual configuration of that workflow we just looked at. And we'll see that we have, in this case, 4 steps in the workflow. You notice this step, the last step, is hidden. And you can see that by a little eye with a cross through it. So we didn't see that in the workflow. And we have these 3 steps that are shown by default. You can drag those steps around to change the organization of them, the sequence of them, excuse me. And you can add in a new step by just clicking on Add Step, and then we'll call this one Test Step. And we'll just pop in a valid username there. And then just save. Oops, excuse me. So the valid username, how about this one? And then it just automatically adds it into the workflow. We can change it. So it's basically adding a new step into the workflow. Within each of these steps, then, you can see all the data elements that are captured. So here we have the employee field that we looked at earlier on. And if I look at the definition of that field, it's a lookup question. So here's the label, if you like, the question that you're asking. This is the code that's automatically generated for you. And then down here we have the question type. So it's a lookup. You can also have many different types of questions, so single-line text, calculated field, as you can see down there. I'm not going to go into each one of these during this presentation, but just to cover off some of the more important ones, like person or group. So you can capture a username in one of the questions, and then you can use that username to assign the user to another step in the workflow. So you can dynamically, every time the workflow executes, you can dynamically assign, for example, who's the manager of the person. You can dynamically assign the manager step to that particular person that you enter. We can also handle things like repeating tables. These are complex tables. I'm going to show you one of those in another workflow a little later. We can put in things called separators. Well, separators are actually text and graphics that you can include inside the form, and they give instructional messages to people to actually tell them, okay, this is what you have to do next, or they can give warnings, like you can show separators under certain conditions. So there's lots of different question types. As we look down, then we can see how that question type is configured. So we have a lookup question, and down here we can see that it's mandatory, it's required, yes. We can enter in a description, which is the help text that will appear next to the question. And down below, because it's a lookup question, you can see that we can select a list from the system and look up that particular list. So it just browses to any of the lists in this particular site. So we just pick a list, and then what it does is it retrieves the columns. Then you pick a column that you want to look up, and then you can sort it in a different way if you want to. And you can use filtering to limit the values returned from the list. But all of this is configured through this web form, so there's no code involved in any of this. And if we take another field, for example, the annual leave year there, and look at that, that you can see is a choice question, so a different type of question. And down below, well, first of all, the first part's very simple, required yes, no, help text. But below then, because it's a choice question, you see here we have an area to enter choice values. And then we can specify as a drop down or a radio button and so on. And all of the question types work like this. So if I pick a number, for example, you see that the area changes, and then we have a minimum and maximum for the number, and the number of decimal places that we want to have, and so on like that. So setting up these fields is very easy, and once you've set up your fields, you can then set up some business rules to make the form dynamic. So here on the employee field, we have a couple of business rules here. One is to hire to show questions. So you remember some new fields appeared when I selected an employee. So let's have a look at that particular business rule. And here we have a trigger, and the trigger is the employee value is being updated. I can enter in some conditions if I want. So I could say, for example, where the employee name is equal to Paul Stone. Okay. So if the employee name equals Paul Stone, then it will execute the action. And the action here is to hire to show questions. So I'm going to show all these questions. In fact, I'm going to hide one of them as well. So let me pick one at random. And I'll pick, I don't know, type of leave. And I'm going to hide that by default. And I can also pick another one from an entirely different step, so even HR approval. I can hide the department in HR approval, or I can decide to disable it, making it read only. So all of our rule actions work in this way. We have an event and we have some conditions, and if you have no conditions, well then it just goes ahead straight away and executes the action. And the action then is dependent on what type of business rule it is. So here we're hiding or showing questions. Let me show you a different type of business rule, get list data. So in this particular business rule, same trigger, same conditions, but you'll see the action is different because we're getting some information from a list. So we look up the list we select the list we want to look up, and then we use some filtering and we say, okay, I want this particular list column to equal this particular question value. Okay, so I pick a value here. Again, it's all point and click and very straightforward. And then it says these are the columns I want to retrieve, and here's the target questions in the flow that I want to drop the values into. Okay, so it's all kind of simple point and click stuff. And just very briefly, and I'm just conscious of time, there's a lot more business rules that you can use. So for data integration, you can add and update lists. You can execute store procedures, and that's a little bit of a technical speak in there. Sorry about that. But you can get user profile properties and all sorts of things like that. And then down here you can send communications, so you can send emails. You can also generate documents. So we, again, conscious of time, but the send email rule, let's just have a quick look at that. allows you to send an email based on a template. So at a particular point in time, in this case when the step is completing, so when the first task, the employee leave request completes, when a person presses submit, then I'm going to send an email. And I could put in some conditions again if I wanted to. And I'm going to send the notification email, let's say. And I want to email the person that's assigned to the manager step. Okay, so I'm going to send the manager a notification. And I'm going to change the content of that notification. So I'm going to say, well, that's a very simple piece of text. I'm going to say, please view the associated form. And then I'm going to put in a thing called a token form link. And what will happen is when the email gets sent out to the manager, they'll see an actual link inside the email that they can click on, and it will take them straight into the form, and they can go in and decide to approve it or reject it. Okay? So that's what I would do, and then that's all I need to do. And if I press OK now on this, it will simply automatically start sending an email to the manager requesting that they approve. But there's a lot more options. I can actually copy additional users, for example. I can email people who are defined in a question in the workflow. So if I capture the manager's name inside the form itself, then I can email that person that they entered, that's when it was entered. And I can email people on specific dates, so I don't have to email them right now. I can email them in a week's time. I can also set up reminders that people will be reminded to complete their task unless it's being completed ahead of schedule. So the emailing system is quite comprehensive, and you can even attach documents to the emails if you want to. We also have this generate document functionality where we can generate Word or PDF documents automatically and associate them with the workflow. Now the rule itself is very simple. The real part of it is this piece here. So you can use things called document templates. Let me show you what one of those looks like. So here we have, here we have a document template. And you might notice it's built in Microsoft Word. So this is a thing called an accident summary report, and it's linked into a different flow called an incident report. I'll show you that briefly in a moment. And here we actually we built a plugin into Word that allows you to integrate the flow details in with the document. So for example here, if I wanted to insert a value from the form into this position in the document, I just go over here and I open up the form configuration. You can see in this particular form there's lots and lots and lots and lots of questions. So I can take the job title answer and just pop that inside here. And then when the document is generated, it will automatically substitute in the job title answer that was entered in the form. And you can generate this then as a Word document or as a PDF and associate it with the workflow. So let me just actually show you that in action. So if I just close this, I'm going to not save those changes. Let me show you some of the other forms that we have here in the system. So I showed you the leave request flow. If I just show you our CapEx as an example. So this is another one of our template flows we provide you kind of free of charge, and you can then go and modify this to your own requirements. So this is the capital expenditure flow, and here you have what we've put out the risual logo there up in the top, but of course you can substitute your own. This area up here is editable. You can put in whatever branding and all that you want to. And on this particular flow, the way it's set up is that it just shows you the current steps. So this is just the first step in the workflow. And the reason this particular workflow shows you the current step is because you have complex approvals later on. So depending on what information you capture in the CapEx request, the approvals vary. For example, if this is an IT CapEx, you see there's a question here, IT CapEx. There's some help text along with this. And if I click yes, it will show me introduce an IT CapEx step into the workflow. So IT will have to approve this particular capital expenditure. I can enter in the number. I can then specify who it was requested by, who it was issued by, etc. And the department and so on. And then down here, I can specify details about the asset. And then you notice here, this is one of those repeating tables I referred to earlier, where we're entering in some details. And basically, we might want to enter in multiple rows. So we enter in multiple rows of information and so on. And it will tot up the values, I think, at the end, as far as I remember. So once we're happy with this, we can then submit it on, and it will, in this case, it will close the form, as far as I remember, because it, I don't think I'm logged in as the correct user. So let me just see if I press submit now. Oh no, it lets me go in. So in this demo environment, I'm set up as the IT manager, so I can do the IT approval. So here was our original request carried out by somebody in finance, and then it moves on to the following step in the process, which is IT approval. And it does that because I've specified it's an IT CapEx. Okay, if it wasn't an IT CapEx, this step wouldn't show in the workflow at all. So you just see request, department manager, and VP approval. Okay. Once I click on yes, I then submit, and it goes on to the next step in the workflow, which is department manager, and then on to VP approval. Okay. So that's a quick view of that. Let me do another one now, which is let's pick instant management. So this is a slightly more complex flow. Again, it's a standard template that we provide, and here you're entering in the details of an incident that occurred, where you're capturing in the time of the date and time of the incident, exactly what happened, and who did it happen to, and then you ultimately press submit, and the system generates a document based on all this information that's captured here, and the document is then signed off by the employee. So let me quickly show you what the document would look like. Here we see an example document that was generated. So in fact, it was using that template that I just showed you, so this template here, and it generates a document, and there's a document with the information populated into it automatically. In this particular instance, the document includes a digital signature, so you have to actually sign the document with digital signature before the workflow will allow you to progress. Okay. Now, digital signatures are quite straightforward to use with FlowForma, but you must of course have a digital signature infrastructure set up, just so that you're aware of that. Okay, so it goes for employee sign off and then on to the safety committee for review and action. Okay. The next, I'll just show you one more, which is a change request management. So where we have an IT change request coming in, and they've asked you have people coming in asking for a change to one of your existing systems, and you're sending a request into IT. Here you can enter in some details. It'll pass on then to a project manager, and then ultimately onto a change control board to review your change and whether they'll accept it for going forward and so on. Okay. I jump back now a little bit to our the basic system and some of its features. One of the things the system allows you to do is to set timelines for all of your activities. So you can set approximate timelines or estimated timelines for your leave request processing or for your IT CapEx processing and so on. And then you can use this feature activity monitoring to view how the various forms in the system are performing against estimated durations. Now in this particular case, everything's going very well because everything's blue, there's no red at all, and of course it's a demo system and there are only a handful of forms in here. So here I can see there are 3 CapEx requests. If I click on the bar, it'll show me the 3 CapEx requests, but I don't need to worry about those because they're all within the estimated completion date. So these are all set, I think, within 3 days, and they were all generated today by myself, so that they're all running fine. But I can click on any of these CapEx requests and look into the detail. And if I had a red bar here, it would show me some CapEx requests that were running late, and I'd be able to identify why those CapEx requests were running late. I can also view a thing called a historical view analysis, which shows me those same CapEx requests but broken down by step. So these are all the steps in the CapEx requests, and I would be able to see bottlenecks in the system. Let's say, for example, if the department manager approval was always running late, I'd see that showing as a big red bar. I could click on the red bar, and then down below I'd be able to see the forms that actually relate to that red bar, and then go in and investigate why I've got the bottleneck in the system. Now, the system also provides reporting via a thing called an OData service, which can be used by systems like Power BI. And so Power BI is a reporting tool. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it lets you import information from OData, and then you can report on all the information that's captured in this site. So in all of the different forms, all the data fields can be reported via OData through something like Power BI, and you can build a dashboard for and so on to show you how your system is performing. Okay, so if I jump back now to our presentation, I've showed you a little bit about the end user experience. Excuse me, just pop that out there. About the end user experience and configuration and deployment. And now I'd like to talk to you a little bit about mobile accessibility. So if you're using Office 365, all the forms that you have on your site are accessible on a mobile device. And we built our mobile app to show the form very much as you see it on the screen. So if we look to the right-hand side, you see a form which contains the questions pretty much exactly as you would see them on your desktop application. So if you're running Internet Explorer, for example, you'd see the same view of the form. So it's designed basically to work in an identical manner to the desktop version. And you can see the form and you can enter in the details, and when you're satisfied the information is complete, you can press submit, and what happens is the system communicates with the SharePoint site on Office 365 and submits the information to that. So you can immediately jump into the SharePoint site and see the information that you just updated via the mobile device. Also, if, for example, in the leave request example, if you had a manager who was on the move and they needed to approve one of those leave requests, what the manager can do is see a list of the forms that are assigned to him at the moment. So he'll be able to see that leave request form, he can see it's assigned to him, and he can click on it and open it up, and he'll be able to, on the mobile device, approve it or reject it and send it back. So the mobile client works very well. It works in a very similar way to the desktop version of the form. And you do not need to create a separate version of your workflow or form for the mobile device. In fact, it works the same way, so you don't need to create a mobile version of anything. And also, mobile is not licensed separately, so basically your mobile client, you just download the app from the App Store, your Google App Store, or from iTunes, and then you literally link it into your site, which you've made a very simple process. And you can automatically start using the forms, creating new forms and using existing forms on that site. We have an authorization process, so you can actually block users. If you don't want people to do this, you can block users from doing it, so don't worry about that. Also, we have an offline ability so that you can actually use the mobile device to fill in forms offline when you don't have connectivity, and then resubmit those forms when you are back on a Wi-Fi network, for example. And you can control that offline ability as well. So we have a lot of control features to manage your mobile users. Okay, so a little bit now about architecture and integration. Now one thing I'd like to say is that before we move on to architecture is the deployment method, the delivery method on FlowForma. Basically, it's a very, very quick tool to build solutions. And typically, you would go in as a business consultant. I would go into a workshop in the morning, and in the afternoon, I'd be able to start building the solution and show something back to my end users the following day. It's a very, very quick solution a very, very quick tool to construct solutions. And because it's an all-in-one tool, data collection and workflow and document generation all bundled into one thing, it's very quick to build complete, meaningful solutions for end users very, very quickly. And as you've seen, it doesn't require code. You can just configure all of this using a point-and-click kind of interface. And then it's immediately deployed on your SharePoint site. You can give people a login to log into that SharePoint site, and they can start playing with it straight off. So it's a very, very quick deployment mechanism. Also, the workflows that I've shown you are very simple. In fact, you can build more complex workflows, and the rate that you can build them is very high, and you can show progress to people very quickly. So you can actually let's say, map out a 10-step workflow and build the first couple of steps in a day and show those, play those back to end users, within days, and they can review them and accept them. So in a typical waterfall approach, you're writing a specification, and then you go away to your developers, and they develop it for several weeks, and then they come back to you like a couple of months later. That's not the way FlowForma works at all. You build things as you go. So you workshop a thing, you go away and you build some of it, you play it back, you amend it, you build the next piece, you play it back, you amend it. It's all very interactive, it's all very inclusive, and it promotes, in fact, SharePoint deployment within the organization, because it promotes the use of SharePoint, in fact. So it's a very good tool in that regard. Now, quickly on the architecture, the solution is built on what's known as an app architecture, which means it's very compliant with lots of different types of infrastructure. So if you have an on-premise installation of SharePoint 2013, for example, you can install FlowForma on the on-premise installation. You can also install FlowForma on Office 365, which is a cloud-based service and is very friendly towards an app infrastructure. It installs as an app basically in your Office 365 tenant. Now, sorry to get a little bit technical here, but at the end of the day, architecture is a fairly technical subject. So, where the different components deploy differently depending on the infrastructure that you deploy them on. So the on-premise installation and the Office 365 installation have different deployments, but they use it's the same product, the same code base, the exact same functionality across both environments. Now, one of the things I didn't talk about was the fact that your workflows can interact with each other. So, for example, if you had a HR employee onboarding workflow, that employee onboarding workflow could get to a certain point where it needed to be passed on to the finance department and the facilities department to set up the employee on the payroll system and on the door access system, for example, and maybe onto the IT department to build their laptop. And these would require other workflows maybe for the IT department to carry out several steps and so on. And what FlowForma can do is it can launch other workflows. So the HR workflow can launch a whole entirely separate finance workflow, which is carried out by an entirely different department, different set of users completely. And those two workflows know about each other and can communicate with each other and pass data between each other. So therefore the HR workflow will know when the finance workflow completes, and maybe the finance workflow then has a payroll code that is automatically sent back to the HR workflow to update the HR system. So it has quite sophisticated functionality, and because it uses the same code base across infrastructures, you can have your on-premise installation communicating with your Office 365 installation as well. Okay, on the integration side of things, let me just skip past that. I've talked about let me just skip past there. I talked about an integration with third parties. So you can integrate using SharePoint Business Connectivity Services so that you can replicate external data on SharePoint lists. You can also call SharePoint SQL Server store procedures and pass information in and out of store procedure parameters, again using very straightforward point-and-click interface, which gets over several problems you might have with integration. And you can also do things called custom business rules. So if you wanted to call external web services, you can create a custom business rule using a language called JavaScript. It's quite straightforward to pass information from FlowForma into an external web service and call information back. There's a lot more to talk about there, but I want to keep it fairly brief on the technical side here today. Okay, so we're on to Q&A, and at this point, if anybody has any questions at all, feel free to ask.
Paul, there's a question in the IM space of the.
Oh yeah, sure.
You can through.
I can't actually, and that's I've got the full-blown presentation up here.
So I'll just read it out to you. So Andrew said, rather than navigate to the FlowForma site on SharePoint and launch a form from there, could you use a predefined link from within a page to launch a form?
Yeah.
So if you had a page which described the process of applying for leave, could you have a link at the bottom which simply launched the leave form, or could it be embedded within a page?
Yeah, so the answer is absolutely yes. It's designed to work from intranet. So if you have an existing intranet and you want to place a link on your intranet page, you can just launch the form directly from the intranet. The FlowForma site is still required to store the form, but you can launch it and view it from your internet page. Now, here's an example of this is still a FlowForma site, but we just modified it slightly. See, at the end of the day, the FlowForma site is just a storage area. We just see it as a storage area for your flows and for your forms. Your flows, your workflow definitions, your forms, your instances. But you know what? You can modify that site first of all. Here it's been modified to have tiles that actually launch the form. So your tile here, new starter, automatically launches the new starter form. Here we go. So we can use this kind of technology to, you can place that tile, you don't have to place it on the FlowForma site, you can place it on your internet, and then it'll just automatically launch the form like you see it here. Okay. So the short answer, I guess, Andrew, is absolutely yes. You can integrate this with your existing SharePoint environment, or indeed a website, even a standalone website if you wanted to launch the form using a link. Okay, so that's what actually happens here. We basically have a link, and you go to a certain link and it goes new form ASPX and whatever, and it just launches the form automatically. Okay.
So Paul, Andrew's just said super, thanks.
Oh, great. Okay.
His question, which is good.
Yeah.
Was there any other questions for Paul from the people on the line? You can either drop those into the IM box, or obviously please feel free to come off mute. We've only got a small group of us.
Yeah. That's fine. If you have any questions at all later, you can contact me either directly or via risual to follow up on any technical questions you might have.
Absolutely. So massive thanks from all of us, and a huge apologies for the technical issues this morning. We'll definitely be looking at making sure that doesn't happen next time when we try and speak with you. If you would like to reach out to Risual, of course they are our key partner in the UK and can perform demonstrations of the product and bring us in or speak directly to you. So please feel free to reach out to your normal contacts, or I believe there's some contact details in the slides, which I'm very sure Molly will send out to you all. And thanks again for your patience.